why do we have it? Don't give them the picture all.
I think you're right.
What they need to do is come up with a reflection plan with a blank canvas.
There
Then
you
we
go.
wouldn't have to worry about it.
Or has IR dash.
Where's your makeup?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to apply to us with security.
Everyone's a thing.
John's right. Really bright IR.
We only need one blue sheet. You can send them both out.
Partner hat.
There she is. Oh, she came back with the extra instructions. Look at that. See, somebody tilted it. You brought us one. That's all it is. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we can find it. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it. Okay, let's get started. So this is rum. If that isn't your drink of choice, you could find another fine room. There's plenty of rooms to choose from. We do have. I do remind you that we have quite a few participants that are remote on MeetEcho. So please do use the microphone carefully, because those people who are not in the room can't hear you shouting across the room. Yes, we have a note taker. Gene has graciously volunteered, and a jabber scribe. Jonathan has graciously volunteered. But please help them by saying your name, even though we know everybody in this room. Please say your name for everybody's sake. It would be very helpful on the other end. On the other end, exactly. It's still just Tuesday, so not everybody knows what Note Well is. Again, everybody in the room does, but for those of you who are new to the IETF process, you really do need to make sure that you understand the meaning of the IETF Note Well. This is all. Yeah, it's all. How did that work? There we go. It really does govern our conduct here. It's important that you understand what it says before you participate. So our agenda for today, we have minute taker. All right, we'll start the blue sheets going around. Right.
So we're going to back up the other side.
Yeah. Our agenda for today, we're going to remind ourselves of why we're here. Henning is going to spend a little time talking about other documents that are relevant to the work that we are doing, and maybe guideposts for things that we want to take into account as we go through our work. There is a draft Rosenru 00, which I will present, and then we have an open discussion. Does anyone wish to bash the agenda? Okay. Eric, review.
So since I can follow directions, your name. I'm Eric Berger. And in fact, this is very appropriate. The Internet Society has got a bunch of policymakers coming in. One of the things we talked about was how government and the IETF can work together. And this is one of those times that we have a situation out there where there's a service that's been running, so we're not experimenting. It's not a science project. And that particular application is video interpretation for deaf and hard of hearing. So it's a relay service. Hearing person calls a deaf user, and that call gets routed.
Oh, we think your mic is off.
Why your mic is off?
Really?
And I don't know how to sign.
Is that Is the light on?
It could be as simple as.
How about now?
Oh, much better.
So now that I've finished with the things that I don't want recorded, it's a very basic call flow. The only thing is today, those video phones that the users have are, for all intents and purposes, proprietary. Either proprietary hardware or maybe a standard platform, but with proprietary software on it. We think the time is right to come up with a standard interface and a globally standard interface because these are services that are not limited to the United States. There are other countries that would like to offer similar services, and you can imagine the protocol mechanisms actually could be useful for other scenarios. My understanding is our charter is limited to this particular use case, so it's very nice to have a concrete thing to look forward to. But I guess my point is this work has broad international impact, and that we have the tools. We all have SIP and WebRTC and language tags, and here's an interesting one. After much hemming and hawing, we've just gotten the vendor community to maybe consider SRTP. Whereas I think if we develop something here in the IETF, things like that would probably be table stakes. So again, looking forward to a lot of refinements and help in coming up with a good IETF quality standard. It is worth noting, if you're thinking again, is this a science project? The FCC runs, or through one of our contractors, runs some pretty significant interop testing. So there are already interop events that can be put together for this. So once we have a profile, we can actually make sure it works. So with that, does anyone have any questions for me? Great. Thank you very much. This is called Leave No Trace.
Yeah. All right. Now we got to fumble and get Henning to present. Henning, can you start your presentation? And let's see. You should be able to hit the button.
Here, can you hear me now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay. No, I'm not pitching Verizon. So let me give you a little bit of history based on what Eric was starting to talk about in that. So next slide, please. So for most of you, this is old news, and I see a number of people on the call, on the remote participation that probably are much better qualified to talk about it than I am, but I will try, and I'm sure they will correct me if I were to make a mistake. So the use scenario that we've been dealing with for a number of years really is our video relay services, which consist typically in its classical form of two models, namely one is the one shown on the slide, where you have a deaf or speech impaired in some cases user who wants to communicate with a hearing person who only has a classical phone, audio only device, and does not converse in sign language. The deaf user in an outbound call contacts the service provider that they have subscribed to, and then that in turn rings up the hearing person. The interpreter acts as a human media translator between the ESL signed by the deaf user, captured by a camera, which is then relayed in voice spoken by the interpreter to the hearing person, and vice versa. The hearing person's voice is conveyed in the signed interpretation of the interpreter to the deaf user on a video screen. This has been like I said, around for somebody will know the precise date, but more than a decade, certainly, probably 20 years in one form. Started out in H323, and in devices that you attached to a television set, and then now looks very much like a commercial video conferencing product, and indeed in many cases is derived from a commercial video conferencing product or some WebRTC type of model. Next slide, please. I will point out this is not directly relevant to RUM, but it does interact with it to some extent, is the US video services, video relay services, use two databases, one which are a familiar database technology that probably, one could argue, probably has the largest use in video relay service after it is not quite caught fire elsewhere, namely enum. So there is an enum database that maps a traditional 10-digit telephone number to a gateway address, which is then serves the subscriber in that. So that all of the video relay service providers use that as a mechanism to figure out where to send the SIP call, or in the old days, the H323 call in that. More recently, there is been established for a variety of management purposes, primarily to establish eligibility. The program has had a history of fraud and other issues that have occurred. So there's a concern, given the high cost of providing the service, that only eligible users use it in ways that are accountable. So there's a user registration database that uses an HTTP JSON style query model in a completely proprietary. So this unfortunately is not modern. Way to bind a telephone number to essentially an Ital URL, as well as some management-related information, eligibility, and so on. And that. Next slide, please. One important part, and Eric, I think, alluded to that in one aspect, namely that what we talk about in RUM really, while motivated by video relay service, they're actually three different major services that are used by people who are deaf or hard of hearing and need communication assistance, namely the video relay model that is the focus of our discussion here, various forms of text relay, and what's known as caption telephone service, IPCTS, that augments a telephone call by a human, at the moment mostly human-generated speech-to-text rendition that can be used by a person who can speak as in audio, as well as one needs assistant understanding the other side beyond the audio call. What I want to point out for RUM purposes, importantly, that really, if you think of these three services, even though they have very different user bases, for example, caption telephone service is primarily used by late deafened individuals, typically elderly. VRS is used by people who are more part of a deaf community. Obviously, you have to be speaking sign language, so on. From a technology perspective, they're really just combinations of different media. So you can think of it as you have three different media: audio, depending on and going one or both directions; video, again, one or two ways, typically usefully only two-way, and text going back and forth. And you can essentially construct these relay services by taking some combination of these services, which means that the RUM specification and any devices that implement that could well be used for example, some enhanced version of text relay, some enhanced version of caption telephone service, in addition to its primary use case in video relay service. I will also point out something I forgot to mention early on, that probably by use ours, the largest user of video relay service, and particularly until recently when other means like FaceTime and other proprietary applications became available, are actually for communication between deaf individuals. So there are people who use that as a number-based, universally available, as in there's a expectation that everybody in the United States has at least potentially access to video relay service for free. And if you know that person's telephone number, you can now converse with that person without having to worry about whether using WhatsApp or FaceTime or Skype or one of the half dozen different Google options or whatever else they might use. There's a point-to-point mode as well as a relayed mode in that. And so, but in general, all of the relay services, and just to some extent, I think, should inform our discussions going forward. Would be quite useful if some of these other relay services could also use the same technology. Again, that offers new opportunities for new services that we currently can't easily offer because they're stovepiped. Next slide, please. Again, this is a short version of how a call works. It's very much for anybody in the SIP domain very familiar. Is they're typically two providers that are connected to each other by IP on the internet. Generally, they don't, as far as I know, typically don't do private peering, but they establish a secure tunnel of some sort, and they query a database which operated by Newstar that then returns a SIP domain that returns a SIP invite, and so it looks very much like a inter-provider SIP call to all of us. Next slide, please. So what are some of the recurring problems that motivate this particular work? For many years, we've had really two problems. So one initially was that it was difficult at reasonable quality to make calls between providers. And in the United States in particular, we have a situation where we have one very large provider that has somewhere around 80% market share and a number of smaller providers that divide the remainder. Sometimes users have multiple providers for any number of reasons, but in any event, it was a challenge initially to provide interoperability, particularly at equivalent video quality, as in you might get better quality if the two participants in the call, particularly for point-to-point calls, were using the same provider versus another provider. And that problem, as was alluded to through the interoperability test, seems to be largely solved. Where some prodding by the FCC along the way to make everybody play nice, or at least pretend to play nice. And what is the remaining problem that RUM addresses is the ability to take a user agent among services. So what you might call device porting, although it's really software in many cases these days, not a physical device in that. Namely, a user interoperability. Currently, every service, even though they're often based on SIP, they're often using fairly familiar technology that we all have seen, that are standards-based at least mostly. You cannot take a device that you acquired through provider A to provider B. If you happen to use two providers, you have to use two pieces of software, just like the FaceTime versus WhatsApp had one. So that software is currently provided for free, and I put that intentionally in quotation marks because it is free to the user. But as I mentioned, this is a subsidized service. The service is provided by ratepayers like you, at least if you are in the United States, to VLS users. And so the cost of equipment is certainly a small fraction of that as well. The other idea that motivates that is that VLS is a small market. If my recollection is correct, and Eric can chime in with more up-to-date or correct numbers, but 300,000 users that use video relay service. There's far more users for caption telephone service, but for version of a video relay service, it is a small, relatively speaking, a small service. The reason I'm getting
Trouble?
I'm getting echo.
No, we're okay here.
Okay, let's see if I can talk over my own echo. So the problem there is that it's a relatively small market for each user, for each service, and so the cost of providing innovative user features, new platforms, and so on is relatively high. So, for example,
Yeah. Sorry, he just lost it. We'll see if he'll come back. Well, we'll see if he comes back.
Give him a minute to come back, yeah.
Yeah.
Medico might have been trying to fix his echo, they just commented they were trying to fix that, so.
Okay.
What's with the mouse?
I don't know.
That's Medico remote access to the computers.
Ah.
Possibly
Right.
don't do.
We are not doing
Well,
that.
no, it's jumping around like mad. This is not like, there is no physical device in the real world doing that. Or if there is, then the transportation technology that I want to apply to humans.
Just no. We'll give him a couple minutes, and if not, we'll move on.
Come back to him.
Yeah.
But maybe it won't take long.
Yeah, right. He's still on the list, yeah, but he's not.
Medico was talking to him.
All right.
can you see me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Henning.
Okay, good. Sorry, I don't know what's went on. I just reloaded. So we have some WebRTC issues, I suppose. So in any event, we want to support additional platforms beyond typically Mac and PC is common today, and some mobile platforms, typically Android and iOS, but some specialty platforms are harder. You can think of things like some of the emerging in-home platforms like Facebook and Google and Amazon and so on that offer video screens and cameras in some extent. You can't really easily add that if Google or Facebook or Amazon wanted to do so. One interesting one that is not as discussed as frequently is for a number of reasons, people want to switch providers on a call-by-call basis. So this could be because calls fail, either because they're long wait times, this is human, and their bursts of activity, so you might have to wait a while to get a interpreter. People might want to try some other service, or just because they're failures, as in kind of my version of that. For both outbound calls and also people have multiple numbers for incoming calls for any number of reasons, again, the ability to try out new services, whatever, and it would be nice to have it all coming in on one device as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the full interoperability cake version in that. So we have the base plate, namely we need to, and Brian will talk about those in detail. I will have the various SIP options that need to be defined. We'll clearly have to deal with media types. In the middle, then it gets a little more, in the past at least, contentious as to whether that should be part of it or not. And these are things that fall outside, in many cases, kind of standard voice over IP enterprise text. Nativersa clearly doesn't, but configuration retrieval, as we all know, we've never managed to create standardized SIP configuration that anybody actually uses. NG 911. 911 calls are a mandatory to support feature for every service that offers video relay services. And so then the cherry on top are then services like video and voicemail that are very common, particularly video mail for video for relay, address book portability. I want to be able to port my address book across services to avoid capture, and things like speed dial. And so there are a number of services that have become common but are currently tied to a provider. Next slide, please. So I won't go through that in great detail. This is an incomplete timeline, and in some extent, I don't have the precise date, so don't take this too literally. But generally, we've tried for roughly 7 years now to work on this problem. We collectively, and people who have been interested in video relay service. So one of the first attempts that started, I believe, roughly in September 2012, the SIP forum actually created a task group that addressed 2 problems, but ended actually only solving one of those. The FCC had a major document that codified some of these interoperability issues. MITRE got involved as well, and they're on the call, and they're one of the participants in that. A contract was let to a company called VTC Secure to build a prototype production system for what was called VATRP, video access telephony reference platform. The SIP forum published a provider's profile for interoperability between providers, which has been the subject of these interoperability tests that Eric mentioned earlier. And that MITRE has been taking a much more active lead in this particular effort. There was an early draft that I helped work on, called Draft BIS Route Dispatch, that kind of started and then hasn't really made any progress, but is around for people to look at. The video relay providers have been somewhat, the standardization effort has been, let's say, in some cases contentious. I'll leave it at that. And there's actually, in January, MITRE has released via GitHub a version of VATRP that implements many of these standards, and that you can download. And I've not tried it myself. It believes it runs on Windows only, but that's separate then. And then as Eric mentioned, there is a separate effort that actually attracted a number of people interested in video relay, but was not meant to be exclusive to that, namely called the Interoperable Video Calling Group as part of the North American Numbering Council. A report for that group is pending, but if you're interested in that, you can, oops. I'm getting echo again.
Uh-oh. You're sounding fine okay so far.
Okay. It gives me some error message that I have to request the floor again.
You've got the floor. Keep talking.
Okay. And in any event, the interoperability calling group, one particular aspect, as far as I can tell, and Eric may or may not be at liberty to discuss what the real motivation was, is that one use case for video relay service that was not originally anticipated is communication between people who are otherwise not eligible for relay, and see if it's reconnected. Lost connection.
You started deteriorating, and then now you sound all right. No, now he's gone.
He sounded all right.
He sounds great.
He sounds terrific.
He sounded okay until he disappeared.
Yeah.
Lost connection. It's kind of like the Shakespearean, "Oh, I am slain."
Yeah.
So we can't fix this, but we're going to fix VRS.
Let me see. Now I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I don't think it's my problem because I have a non-NATed 10 gigabit connection to the internet. So, In any event, IVC, one of the use cases that was brought up is that there are a number of entities now that are not eligible for use of video relay service, namely people who are hearing but speak ASL either because they're friends or relatives or teachers or whatever of people who are deaf, or, and this is an increasing use case, of direct video connection, namely where entities such as the Social Security Administration or large telecom carriers or large financial institutions want to hire people who speak ASL to communicate with their user base of people who are deaf, that without involving an interpreter. And that's in everybody's interest because the people who, the calling person gets better service than going through an interpreter, and the relay fund saves lots of money because it's many of the calls that are currently paid for actually go to not person to private person type of communication, but many of those are call center type applications. So RAM in particular is likely, and this goes back to the alternate platforms, is particularly useful for those type of scenarios, namely where the end system is not in a home, but is actually in a giant call center for Comcast or, like I said, the Medicare or something like that, where those calls get handled and they need to be integrated into a call routing system, into an IVR type of system to make that integration feasible. And MITRE in particular has been working on some prototypes in that, and I believe there's some initial implementations in practice actually of direct video calling. Okay, next slide, please.
Read that, I get.
Next slide, please.
We are looking at the charter for SIP Forum VRS.
Okay, that's not appearing on my screen. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's showing up on our version of the Meet Echo thing, so it sounds like you're.
I'll keep on talking.
Keep going.
Again, this is just for reference. This was the original charter. I don't want to belabor it. It simply indicates that RAM is essentially in one way completing the charter that we did, that SIP Forum did not quite complete in 2012 because it deals with the user agent as well. Next slide, please. Again, this is just for reference to illustrate that there is this interoperability profile. Again, mostly for people who haven't looked at it, and clearly what we want to do should be compatible with that. Next slide, please. The video relay service interoperability events take place regularly. I believe the last one was in April of this year, and there is a copy-pasted the report of that. In particular, on the right-hand side, you see that there are a number of new items that also for the interoperability profile between providers, such as stir shake and geolocation for 911 calls, and encryption in that. So there's ongoing work, there's an extension going on for the provider profile that I'm sure will be discussed. And the final slide, there are a number of related efforts ongoing, as in related, broadly speaking, as system-level interoperability profiles, mostly for carriers and PBXs. Most of us are familiar with SIP Connect. Specify like SIP features and codecs. Then there's the IPNNI, ADIS, IPNNI for voice. DOCSIS has their VoIP spec that I'm not very familiar with. WebRTC clearly has codecs. And this is probably one that many of us are not as familiar with. And I admit lack of familiarity until I did a little bit of digging, and I'm still not quite sure to fully understand it. So RCS, the Rich Communication System, that now seems to get some traction. because of one large vendor of handset software, that has a number of interoperability profiles that govern both voice and video. And they have been evolving relatively quickly, as in I've seen versions that are just a few months old and seem to be much more fleshed out than I remember seeing them. So there's a bunch of profiles that indicate, for example, SIP options and early media and, and all the stuff that you see on the right-hand side when I copy pasted the table of contents of one particular effort, namely for video, the IR94 effort. All those specs are publicly accessible. I didn't have to do anything special to get that. So it seems like that's another source of related information that would be helpful to consider. It would be, and this is my editorial, it would be nice if it wouldn't be too difficult to bridge between the RUM world and the RCS world, even if they're not bit compatible, but if they're at least gatewayable without doing media translations or without having to munch call flows too much in that. That's all I had, and
That's great.
any discussion?
Questions? Thank you very much, Henning.
Okay.
All right. I think it's this, which gets me to here, which gets me to here.
Just for full disclosure, I've been the editor of the VRS provider profile, the first version, and there's a new version in progress. The new version will have SRTP.
So there's this draft out there that was put out to start discussion of this work group. And I'm working on an update to it, which I hope actually I will have out before the meeting is over. I wanted to talk about what's in there. This is mainly a table of contents discussion rather than the detailed stuff. I urge you to read the draft and comment on it. I did get some comments from Ollie, which I very much appreciate, and I'm going to incorporate all that I can of that into this next version and start discussion on the few items that I wasn't exactly sure how exactly we wanted to handle it. But if others could read the draft and see whether what they think of it, that would be really great. So the top level table of requirements go into some generic SIP requirements. It just lists. It's basically the Hitchhiker's Guide stuff. You must do all of these RFCs. There's a section on signaling, which includes creating a call, mid-call stuff, ending a call, that kind of stuff. There's a section on media, which currently has specific guidelines. In the new version, it will reference the WebRTC media specs. That's one of the things I'm doing. The SRTP and SRTCP things are there, which also probably will get subsumed if we pick up all those. The WebRTC specs will probably pick up most of that also. Following the discussion that Henning brought up about wanting to have profile stuff beyond the simple signaling stuff, there's a section in there about contacts. And then there's something that deals with at least an aspect of voicemail. And then there's a section that deals with provider provisioning and provider selections. I'm going to go into some of this in a little bit more detail. So the SIP signaling includes a registration, session establishment with normal calls. There's something that's specific for VRS in there that has to do with having a video endpoint connected to one provider and then using another provider for a particular call to use their interpreters for a particular call. That's called dial round, and there's discussion in there about short circuit signaling for that. There's how you specify from and to, section on incoming calls and a section on emergency calls. There's mid-call signaling, which is very short, doesn't really say a whole lot. It says you got to handle refer and a couple of other things. It has a section on exactly how we handle phone numbers, and has a section on NAT traversal, which says stun turn. And again, we'll probably make sure that we're in compliance with whatever exactly WebRTC says on that. The media section, as I said, currently gets into specifics, but it'll probably get replaced. But it does cover real-time text, RFC 4103 real-time text. Video currently uses H.264. Audio currently says 711 with a couple of other options. DTMF says the obvious things, and SDP is pretty simple. Deals with some of the privacy issues involved. You've got to deal with features, packet loss indicator, and specifically for video, full interframe request features. So there's currently text there, once again, probably be impacted by the WebRTC specs, which have equivalent mechanisms. But that's what's in that current one. In the context section in the current document, it actually describes two mechanisms. One's a file-based upload and download of a JCard, and then it uses CardDAV to do a sync of those functions. Provisioning basically is download of a JSON object. It defines the object. Also provides a way for consumers to have a single device that can register to multiple providers, and so it can select which provider it's using, and includes the schemas for those things. So we get to decide whether we want to use this document as a basis for our work. We get to decide of that which sections we want to keep and which we want to change. And so this is just a draft. It has no special significance, but it does really introduce the kind of ideas that we have. And I will put out as I say, I'm going to put out a revision incorporating the comments and including at least the first pass of WebRTC references instead of the current media specs. And then I'm going to ask that we adopt this as a working group item. So that's where we are. And as I say, you can expect to see this revision of the document hopefully before the end of this week, if I get enough time and don't have any other things in the way. But I really would appreciate any other reviews people want to do in the current document, which I will incorporate in the next version. That'd be helpful. But otherwise, that's where we are. Thanks.
Jonathan Lennox, is this mic on?
It sounds like it.
Yep,
Yes.
good.
Yes.
Yeah. So one tricky thing from what you said is that I believe WebRTC does not include and browsers do not support real-time text.
Right.
So
It's an important issue. Thank you for bringing that up. So actually, there is a spec, but it says use the data channel. And that would really be an issue for backwards compatibility with existing devices and forwards compatibility with devices that are not specifically WebRTC. We're talking about real-time text, which is not a high data rate issue. So the notion of transcoding from one form of it to another is not an onerous task. I personally, just again, this is my personal hat on, been working on this for a while. My personal hat says do the standard SIP RTP-based 4103, not the WebRTC in the data channel 4103 or real-time text. So that would be my intention for that.
Does anybody implement the real-time text over data channel?
I don't know if anybody's done it yet.
Adam Roach, I wouldn't know either. It's not something we would do. It's something that a application that runs inside a browser context would implement.
Oh, right, because it's in the data channel. It's not part of the browser itself.
Exactly.
Is that the story?
It's something that's pretty trivial to implement on top of it. I mean, the answer might be no now, and if you give me 15 minutes, I could say yes instead.
Yeah.
It's about that simple. But I concede that it's not the sort of thing that you want to be pushing down into terminals that aren't otherwise implementing the data channel stack, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the right decision is going with the SIP approach. Your point about transcoding being very cheap is a salient one, and perhaps there can be, some interest fostered in putting these things, speaking no hats whatsoever, not even, related to my employer, but perhaps there can be some interest fostered in implementing this sort of thing if it's a straightforward application and gets relatively well deployed.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Recognizing that DRS services are not like a huge section of the voice.
Yeah, but the thing is that there are I'm aware of a couple of groups of folks who have been writing code for deaf users. There's a couple of university groups that have students who hack. And the notion that we might be able to get a project going which does WebRTC and the data channel implementation for those guys who want it, plus an inner work to a standard 4103, that's a student-sized project. You could give that to a student and say, hey, do this, or a group of students in an open source environment. It's not a bad idea. And we might want to interest one of those guys, one of those groups, in seeing if they could get something like that going. It'd be pretty interesting to do that. So that's actually a very good idea. We'll see if we can get that to happen. Yes, Bernard. Let's make sure.
An open source library called ORTC Lab, which takes contributions. So if you wanted to do that student project, that might be a venue for doing it.
That'd be great. Thank you for mentioning that. And if you wouldn't mind sending me an email so I don't forget it, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you for bringing that up. Very
It'd be good to get
important thing.
How many people here have read the draft?
Yeah. Very good. Great. Oh, Henning's in the queue. Yeah. Let's do Chris first and then Henning. Yeah, he's okay. Yeah. Chris first, then Henning.
Chris went. I was curious, and I don't remember if we talked on the list or in the last meeting about authentication. Giving out SIP credentials is something we generally wouldn't do, like MD5 username and password. It would be more associated with, and I saw in the draft right now.
Right. It's pretty primitive now. Right.
Thoughts of expanding?
Yes. That has been brought up in another environment. I mean, this draft didn't come out of thin air. It's been discussed for a while. And it came up, and we're going to have to, that isn't going to fly in the IETF. It's not secure enough to do that.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, it's, thank you. I'll make sure we get that in the notes, and I will at least put a note that says, we know this isn't good enough. We need to change it. So Henning's in the queue. Henning, go.
Yep. So let me. Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question I have is, how much will you do in the factory authentication issue just raised? How much will you do on configuration retrieval, both extensible and standard?
Yeah, you kind of broke up there, but the question you had was about user configuration. He was bringing up the specific problem of the current thing has username and password in files. So we need to change that. But I do hope, again, we all get to decide how much what's in this document. The current document does have a mechanism for configuring the endpoint. That's a standardized mechanism for configuring the endpoint. That's, as I say, a download of a JSON object. It's no more complicated than that. Just defines a schema for a JSON object. You download it. Your device is configured. I do hope that we refine that in several ways. One of which being the authentication mechanism.
Jonathan Lennox relaying for James Hamlin. Can we clarify that ROM is a user endpoint interface, whereas access from call centers and other video platforms is a network-to-network interface?
This is a user. This is a UNI, not an NNI. The charter of this work group is a UNI interface. It's not an NNI, network-to-network interface. That is what the PIP is. That's what there are others. The IVC document IVC work that Henning was mentioning, that was another example of an NNI interface. This is not one of those. This is a UNI interface, and it's device and user device to provider, not provider to provider.
So, Ms. Paul, the stuff MITRE's doing, part of it is to act like a provider, interface the NNI interface of the providers, and then connect to users that are not deaf users.
So this is Brian, and as Henning mentioned, the FCC is contracted with MITRE to do interoperability testing. They have an endpoint which meets a version of this document that I did. That's called VATRP, VATRP. In order to test that, they test it through their own provider interface so that they're using the provider-to-provider interface as the interface point to test that endpoint. And then they make a call to another provider's endpoint on that. But so yes, MITRE has a test provider interface that implements the PIP, the provider-to-provider interface, but that's just for the test environment. The VATRP is just a user interface. Currently it's based on, WinPhone, and it just does what a user device would be.
I think James' point is that if you want to have a call center full of people, at Medicare or something that can sign and deal with deaf people, you can get a bunch of devices that conform to this, but they've got to connect to something.
They would have to connect to something.
They either
Correct.
have to connect to one of the existing providers,
right,
or else, for which there are currently not really regulations for that.
Right. Okay.
Or alternately, you got to have some other entity that does support the NNI interface with the providers.
Correct.
That connects to those devices.
But all of that's out of scope for this work. I mean, someone could build such a system. Actually, MITRE has a system like that, but it doesn't use an interface like the VATRP or something. It uses WebRTC, but that's out of scope for this work, right? All that's in scope for this work is user device to provider.
Eric Berger just asking a question to know the answer to. So is there source code available and can people go play with it?
There is source code available. I can't tell. There is this release process that MITRE had to go through to put it out that is the standard lawyer problem. I will find out what the URI is, and if it is actually out, if a version is actually out, I will post it to the list. But it is intended that their implementation, which currently is to an early version of this standard, they are contracted to complete making it be conformant to whatever we come out of which, that will be open source and downloadable.
Henning's in the queue, but I think
Jonathan.
I suspect that Henning is more closer to the current topic than I am. So.
Okay, Henning.
Yeah. So I just checked. Is a January 2019 release on GitHub for Windows, as far as I know, and it's publicly accessible.
There you go. Thank you very much.
The link is on my PowerPoint slides in the notes, but I will also post it to a chat room, and somebody already just did.
All right. So yes, there is open source code. Yes, it is available. It doesn't meet this version of the document, but it meets an earlier version of the document, and long term, it will meet this document one way or another.
Jonathan, next. So somewhat related to the previous question about the text, do we consider it a goal that it should be possible to implement a endpoint compliant to the specs we generate entirely in JavaScript in a browser in WebRTC?
So when we were bashing the charter for this group, there was a discussion of the compatibility with WebRTC. And earlier drafts of the charter had more definitive statements about that. It said that it's desirable that it do that. The current charter has some text, but it's a little less than that. So just, again, speaking as a participant, not as a chair, I would like that to be possible. I would like you to be able to build a WebRTC server that used a bug standard WebRTC in the browser client and built a SIP back end that met the spec and have it be able to work totally interoperably with any other VRS endpoint that met the spec. Okay, so that's my goal. I want to make sure I would appreciate, again, speaking as an individual, I would appreciate your help in making sure that we do exactly that, because that's what I want. I would like that to be possible. I would like you to be able to build a WebRTC server with a SIP backend that created the interface that meets the spec.
Chris, that should be possible. Many of us have probably built WebRTC to SIP gateways, so I don't see why it's not possible.
Right, I hope so.
Yeah.
We got to make sure the media is right for that.
Yeah, you got to get all the media. Well, that's why one of the reasons we wanted to do exactly that.
Yeah, we do the media and are working to make that possible as well. The other comment I wanted to bring up was similar to my last one, but I guess related to the provisioning part and making sure the security, like provisioning devices today, there isn't a lot of good standards that the industry conforms to, and I wonder if that's a challenge we need to take on here. And both security of the standard, is there credentials in that JSON object that we need to protect from people snooping, or other things like that? So,
I think you're exactly right. I think that if we can't do that, then that ought not to be in the resulting draft. And I welcome your suggestions on how to achieve that. But I mean, as many people have noted, right, the IETF has taken several cracks at doing provisioning, none of which have been implemented. And it would be nice if we built something that was implementable, at least by this set of people. If it had more generality, great. But right now, I'm just trying to get it to work here. And security is one of those things that you have to get right, or it won't get implemented.
So, in an incident I don't think I've ever seen before, relaying for Metaco.
Ha!
So he says it sounds like something Janus can help with, and they gave a link to their Janus project. It's open source and has a controllable SIP gateway function in the server. They'll make sure to follow the evolution of the group requirements to see if this is easy to prototype. So.
Okay, thank you.
So what was that? Maybe we can turn Meet Echo into one?
Yeah.
Gunner's in the queue.
Go, Gunner. Gunner! Welcome, Gunner.
Thanks.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. This is a good action, and I heard Eric saying that he wanted to be a global action. There are a couple of problems comparing to what we have in Europe and other places. We so far have not really discussed contacts and also the provisioning parts. So the media and the SIP are good and good improvements over what we have. We have an ETSI standard for VRS and its interoperability that has the basics, but it doesn't have the security and all the improvements you have put into this spec. So I think that would be good for global use for that case, but I don't know how to handle the contacts and provisioning. Maybe we should separate it out in separate specs, which is a problem to create many drafts, but that's a reaction anyway. And the hope from Henning about GSMA, the IR92 and IR94 interoperability is in conflict with the other hope to have WebRTC interoperability.
Yeah.
So the GSMA, it has got its implementation in USA now with real-time text for text relay and text communication. But I just noticed that conflict. That is IMS, and WebRTC is not IMS. So we need to specify which way to go. So that's my reaction so far. I read the spec and I think it's good. Certainly a lot of points to discuss. So good luck.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you'll participate and send comments. I think you raised two specific issues that I did want to address, and then we'll go on to the next person in the queue. We certainly can split up the document into multiple documents if it makes sense. I'd like to find a problem that we can't solve relatively quickly before we immediately jump into splitting it up, but I would not be surprised if that ultimately happens. I do hope the contact thing can sail without a lot of work, but we'll see. The provisioning thing, as Chris brought up, has got a bunch of security issues that there are no obvious answers for. So may take more work, and we may decide to split it off just because we want to get the main spec done without that. I think, again, speaking personally, I would like to see the WebRTC specs be part of a standard with maybe a statement that said, in order to achieve interoperability with an IR94 compliant end device, you would use this subset of that. I think it's a proper subset. I don't think that there's a divergence other than supersetting and subsetting, but we'll check it out. Henning?
Yeah, same comment on IR94. I think the same thing is I don't think we need to emulate everything. I just want to make gatewaying, as you said about the WebRTC gatewaying, relatively straightforward without having to do too much media and other call flow rewriting, even though it's going to be IMS on one side and more plain SIP, so to say, on the other side. That's relatively easy to accommodate. I think there are lots of tools, commercial tools that do that. Just if the call flow starts looking really different, then that gets really hard in that. The second part on the provisioning part is one of the differences that I think might make the problem slightly more tractable is that we essentially have a two-stage provisioning model, namely users have identities with providers and possibly in the URD that you could leverage and then to encrypt, for example, credentials, which are then stored with a public key, private key type of encryption in this HTTP retrievable config file, so that you don't have to install individual credentials in each device for each user. So there might be models because of a particular relationship that users have with providers. There might be a model to essentially have some non-visible bootstrapping, as in things that are beyond the scope and those are hard, but they're different, that you can use in that. And it depends a little bit on the providers, whether they're willing to go with something which looks a little bit like a cloud SSH key type of model, or whether they insist on just MD5 encoded among the strings that you can directly copy into a SIP register.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we'll have to talk about this, and maybe I'll start some email threads on the whole thing. And the other possibility is just do it with OAuth. I mean, maybe that'll be good enough. Just have a primary and have credentials stored, have everybody else use, OAuth authentication to prove who you are. Maybe it might work. I mean, we can explore something like that.
Chris went that OAuth, I think, is something to look at. The problem sometimes is terminals don't have very good capabilities of entering username and password or displaying an SSO page or things like that. Or if you want to do it indirectly, like you go to a browser link and enter your password and then it remotely, those are complex flows that from an interoperability point of view may be difficult. So
I think we'll probably have to at some point decide just how far we want to go down whatever rat hole we decide. I think that used to be a bigger problem than it is these days. The devices people are using are more capable, but there are plenty of devices people use that are typing passwords is, pretty painful. Anything else? Great. Please read the draft.
I've only just quickly skimmed through the draft. One thing I didn't find, which occurred to me when you mentioned the European requirements, is I assume the US service is basically just ASL to English, right? How do you handle cases where you've got either multiple possible sign languages or multiple possible spoken languages?
Right. So obviously we want to use the human lang tags. We want to say that.
But I mean, so then you have to specify. So you specify Both, you specify both lang tags, both
Yeah.
unspoken and.
In the invite, you know, this is what I want in and out, and you get what you ask for. I mean, even today, there are providers that have both an English queue and a Spanish queue, or an English queue and a French queue. So that problem exists. Their solutions these days are pretty primitive, and we'd like it to be better. But somehow I thought I had that in there, but maybe I just thought about putting it in there instead of actually doing it.
Well, that's for the spoken mostly. I mean.
No. There's an ASL language tag
I mean,
for this purpose.
I know, but I mean, it's the problem.
Yeah.
Right? As far as the ASL, as long as we're only talking about the U.S., there's really only one.
Right. But human lang tag is the way to say Spanish sign language, English sign language, French sign language, Swahili sign language, whatever. Okay, great. Anything else people wanted to discuss? Otherwise, I think we're done with our session.
With regard to the call for adopt.
Yes.
Let's see, we had more than half a dozen people that have read this.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, let me put the new version out and call for the adoption on 01.
Yeah.
And we can have list discussion to make sure that we're okay on the list, and then we'll do that. So that's kind of the plan. We'll put out the new version, 01 version, let it sit for a while and get people to have a chance to look at it, and then we'll call for adoption on that on the list. Sound all right? Great. That's the plan. Thank you.
You're done. You get to go home early.
That's great.
Don't go home. My session is next.
What's your session? Oh, okay, that's right.
Yeah, I got to be there.
No,
Where's the blue sheet?
Blue sheet, I don't remember saying.
I only started one. I started there. It said to turn it back around
I
to the
saw
front.
it. Ben saw it. I don't know where that was.
And then I gave Ronnie took it.
Okay. Who hasn't gotten a chance to sign the blue sheet?
I think.
Okay, there's a bunch of people that haven't. Okay, let's get everybody who hasn't signed it to sign
It
it.
came late from the person who was speaking.
If you don't want to wait for that one, I got another one up here. If you want to come up and sign this one.
Important safety, do not install software upgrades for your session.
Yeah. You need to be told that?
So